My main focus of interest is spatial vision, so how the visual information is used by machines, but also by biological systems to understand the scene. So today I'll talk mostly about artificial systems, because I know this is your expertise. Feel free to interrupt me whenever you want and to ask questions. So I tried to do a broad overview of the different topics I'm interested in, with something I did over the very recent years and some perspectives about what I'm doing now and what I'm planning to do. So my main interest is computer vision for scene understanding. So what I mean by that is that I want to extract for either images or videos different information that could be important for robotic systems, embedded systems, such as the depth information, the segmentation of the scene, or the optic flow. And the main idea of my research is that we all know that deep neural networks are quite efficient at extracting the visual properties of the scene, but nonetheless they have some limitations. And because they are using RGB data, they suffer from strong illumination changes in the scene, notably during nighttime they don't work that well. They also suffer from motion blur, so when things are moving very quickly in the scene, these systems are not that efficient. And also in terms of energy consumption, they are not ideal. And so most of my work aims at dealing with these difficulties and overpassing these limitations. So because I work on biology, I'm very interested in these spiking cameras that are called event-based cameras. Probably most of you know how they work. So this is a standard camera. They send the RGB or the luminance value for each pixel of the scene at a given frequency, most of the time 60 or 120 hertz. The spiking cameras, they function differently. So they detect illumination change in the scene. So they emit a spike whenever luminance change is detected, so whenever the luminance is increased or decreased, and they do that at a very, very high speed, so they can work up to the microseconds. So here you have like the equation or the way these cameras are working. So each time the logarithmic value of the luminance passes a given threshold, the camera is sending either a non-spike for a luminance increment or an off spike for a luminance decrement. And you see here a video where white and black pixels are representing the on and off spikes. So the idea with this camera is that you can decrease a lot the amount of information that is sent to the neural network. They are robust to the motion blur, and they can also detect more efficiently scenes under low illumination. So in my research, most of the time what I do is that I combine these cameras with either a deep neural network or a spiking neural network for optic flow, depth, or segmentation of the scene. And yes, so most of the time I do that with spiking neural network, but today I'll show you also some works where I only use deep neural networks. So as I told you, the advantages of such an approach is that they are robust to illumination changes, robust to motion blur, and very energy efficient, notably when coupled with SNN. But there are also some limitations because this technology is relatively new. There are not so much data sets, and notably there are not so much labeled data sets that can be used for learning. The data format is always an issue, and also training of SNN is not very easy, and so this is something we need to deal with. So my talk today will be divided in 4 parts. First one on semantic segmentation, because actually I'm here for the PhD defense of Dalia Arep tomorrow, and this is the main topic of a PhD, so this is why I decided to present that today. You'll see that this part is only using event-based cameras, but not spiking neural networks. And then I'll talk about depth estimation, motion processing, and most importantly, maybe upcoming work and perspectives, so things that we are currently doing in the team. So let's start with semantic segmentation. And here the idea is to capture a scene and to be able to extract different properties of this scene. So for example, you want to tell your system to detect persons, cars, trees, road and sidewalk in these videos, and you want the system to do that automatically and efficiently. And so here, what we wanted to do is to do semantic segmentation from event data. And so the idea is to have a human input, so a text prompt with different categories, and to be able to extract from the event data the different categories of the scene. And so one of the issues here is that there are not so much event-based data set, and specifically more when we started this project. So it's difficult to train networks in this case. So something that we did here is to work on domain adaptation. And so we started with a classic deep neural network based on CLIP. So maybe you all know this approach, but this is CLIP stands for Contrastive Language Image Pre-training. And the idea is to go on the web and to find a lot of pairs of text and images, and to train the network to encode pairs of images and text very close by in the latent space. And so you can do that for a million of exemplars, and this is a contrastive learning where you force two members of the same pair to be encoded closely in the latent space and other pairs to be separated. And so you can do that, and from that you can learn like the combination or the pairing between image and text. And once this is done, what is interesting is that you can do open vocabulary and zero-shot classification, which means that for an input image, a query, you can go to the latent space, and from a different set of labels, you can see which one corresponds the most to the image that you put to the system. And so there are ways to do that for semantic segmentation. So in this case, you can do it for each pixel in the input and find what is the label that correspond to each pixel corresponds to. So this is a work that was done by Lingdong Kong, who's a very smart PhD student at National University of Singapore. And he presented that at CVPR last year. So the architecture of the network is a bit complicated, so I won't go through the details, but just to give you a test of what he did. So this part of the network, these are images. So here, these are RGB images, these are event-based images. So here he used voxel grids and over-representation. Actually, he tested different things. So this network is doing contrastive learning with the text, and so is able to extract from the event labels the semantic labels. But here, the idea is to adapt knowledge from this part here, which is actually the CLIP network that I just presented. So the network on the top is based on RGB images. It does a connection between text and images. And the idea is to adapt the knowledge from this network to the event-based network here. And so this is done through what we call superpixels. So these superpixels are based on another network that is the SAM model, so segment anything model. From this pixel, we can, through contrastive learning, force the network here to encode the properties of the event like the properties of the image. And in the very end, we can train the network and adapt the knowledge from CLIP to the event-based network. So just to show you how it works, so this is a video that was done by Lingdong. So here you have the input event stream. So in red and blue, you have the increment and decrement of luminance, the image reconstruction from this event stream, the ground truth labels on the right. Maybe I can show it again. And these are three reconstructions. So this is OpenESS, the technique that we developed, and two other techniques. And so you can see that here, qualitatively, the results are a little bit better with OpenESS. This is another example where each column is a different approach. So mask clip, ESS sub, FC clip, OpenESS, which is here, and the ground truth. And now I can put numbers. And so you can see that when we published that OpenESS was actually the state of the art as opposed to all the fully supervised techniques. And also here it works in open vocabulary, meaning that if your prompt doesn't have exactly the labels that were used for training, it still works. Just to give you an idea of what is possible, so if you type as a prompt something that is drivable, walkable, or like a van, barrier, it can still detect that thanks to the clip approach. So actually, OpenESS permits a coherent prediction across various adjectives, fine-grained, and coarse prompt categories. And here is another video of how it works. And so here, there were different prompts. So you can see here the detection of buildings, vegetation, road, and sidewalks. So to go a little bit further, so this first work showed how it's feasible to extract knowledge from RGB data and clip to perform semantic segmentation on event streams. Here, the idea is similar, but we don't want to use RGB data anymore, so we only work with event data. The idea here is just that event data can change a lot depending on what system is used to capture this data. So what you can see here are data that were captured by a camera, an event-based camera, on a car, on a drone, and on a quadruped. And so these are different exemplars, and you can see that because the point of view is different between these different scenarios, the nature of the data, the statistics of the data are changed a lot. And here you have like the heat maps in yellow. These are the spikes that are the most frequent in this data, and you can see that they change a lot from one vehicle or one point of view to the other. And so we wanted to deal with that, and we wanted to show that it's feasible to extract from knowledge from one domain to the other, specifically because most of the event-based data sets are based on cameras that are on cars, and there are almost none on quadrupeds, and a little bit maybe on drones. And so we use this M3ED dataset that was collected by Shani and collaborator and presented in CVPR. So they collected a lot of data with this system that has two cameras, so a stereoscopic system, an IMU, a LiDAR. So they have the ground truth for many different properties of the scene, and they collected data on the field with a car, on a drone, and on a quadruped. And so what we did here was to, they collected RGB data and also event-based data. And so what we did here was to extract from the RGB data the semantic labels. So this is what you can see here. And so we created a new data set, or we extracted from this data set a new data set that we called EXPO, event-based cross-platform perception. And so it's composed of almost 90,000 frames, and with 19 or 11 classes combined across these different vehicles. And so you can see here some of the statistics. And as I showed you before, the idea here is that depending on whether the camera was on the car, on the drone, or on the quadrupeds, of course, the properties of the data change a lot. And so based on that, we wanted to be able to extract knowledge from one domain to the other. And so this is also a work of Ling Dong. And here the idea is that we have a network that is able to do semantic segmentation from event data. So this is fixed. And so this is the source domain. So this is what you can see here. So for this one, we have the labels. We are able to learn something, but the point is that we want to see if it's feasible to extract from this network that is trained from the data captured on, for example, a car, whether it's feasible to extract some knowledge to perform semantic segmentation from the data captured on another vehicle. So like, for example, can we train a network from data on a car to perform semantic segmentation from data collected by a drone or collected by a quadruped? And so here as well, the network is quite complicated, but the main idea is that we developed an intermediate network that is based on a sort of a blender or mixture between the source and the target. And we do knowledge transfer from this network to this network so as to improve the performances of the source target. So here are some examples. So this is the event stream, the associated RGB frames, and the reconstructions that are done with different techniques. So Eventfly is the one that we developed. This is the ground truth. And this is when we only use the data trained on the source data. So for example, you train the network on the data captured by a car, and you test it on the data captured by a drone. And it doesn't work well because in this case, there's no transfer at all. Okay, does it make sense? Oops, sorry. No, I think I need. Okay. So just a video to show you how it works. Event stream on the top left, RGB frame on the top right, the source-only semantic segmentation on the bottom left, and the Eventfly approach on the bottom right. So it's, of course, it's not perfect, but it's better. And so if we look at numbers, so here, what is important to check, so this is the accuracy, the mean accuracy, the intersection of a union. So the higher these values, the better the performance of the network. And so here you have the value for source only. So once again, this is when the network is trained on data captured by one vehicle and tested on the data captured by another vehicle. And here, this is when the network is trained and tested on the same data. So here, you can see that as the better score or the best score you can hope. And here, this is the score that you get without any adaptation. And so, of course, whatever the technique you use is in between. And so here, what we showed is that with Eventfly, we're actually better and state-of-the-art compared to many other segmentation networks based on event data. And so this is across, so this is from vehicle to drones, and these are the data between any pair of platforms. So from vehicle to drone, vehicle to quadruped, drone to vehicle, and so on. Okay, so just a take-home message for this first part. Once again, without any SNN, but on semantic segmentation. So we introduced a new method that used domain adaptation to perform open vocabulary event-based semantic segmentation. OpenESS provides open vocabulary prediction and lead to state-of-the-art result in terms of accuracy and intersection of a union. And with Eventfly, we have a new framework for cross-platform adaptation in event-based perception. Okay, so now another line of work on depth estimation. And so this is something that I did with my colleague Timothée Masquelier at the CerCo laboratory. And here the idea is to extract depth information from scenes. And so, well, you all know that, but in the end, we want from images or from event streams to be able to reconstruct the distance of every pixel in the scene. And well, it has numerous applications in robotics, for navigation, visually guided actions. And yes, we want to do that with a system that is neuromorphic compatible and that use SNN. So this work is a little bit older, and in this case, we use the dataset that some of you might know, which is the MVSEC dataset. So these are data that were collected from two event-based cameras coupled with two RGB cameras, one LiDAR and one IMU. And so this system was actually placed on a car, on a motorbike, or on a drone. And so this is a system here, and it used Davis cameras to capture the events. And some of the data in this dataset are quite nice. Notably, it includes some outdoor data that were captured during nighttime. So when the luminance value of the scene is relatively low. And so you have one example here. Of course, the data is not as accurate as during daytime, but still the cameras here even cameras are able to capture something. And so this work was done by Ulysse Ranson, who's actually an excellent PhD student. He defended last week, and so we were very happy of what he did. And he did that during his master internship. And so he designed StereoSpike, which is a deep convolutional SNN. So the idea here is that as inputs, you take the on and off images associated with the left and right cameras, and it goes into a deep spiking neural network. And at the very end, the task of the network is to predict the depth. Just to give you more information, so the loss that we used is combining actually a regression loss and a smoothness constraint. So the idea of the smoothness constraint is to preserve local continuity in depth values, but also to take into account the fact that sometimes the depth is a bit broken. And in this case, we didn't use or we didn't process the spikes the one after the other, but we combined them into spike histograms. So these spike histograms are, you can see them as images that are just, representing the number of on and off spikes over the last 20, 50 milliseconds. We use different time windows actually to test what was the best on the performance. And so I told you at the very beginning of the talk that training spiking neural network is not very easy, and until quite recently we believed it was challenging because of the step function of the side function of the neurons that are used. And so this is because this function is associated with a derivation that is non-continuous, but you can approximate this heaviside function with sigmoids, and in this case it's possible to do backpropagation. And so we did that using software that was developed by Wei Fang, a very nice Chinese PhD student who actually just started a postdoc in Singapore. And I deeply recommend this software because it's very powerful. So we did everything using spiking jelly. And so here is an example of what we got. So these are data that were captured by a drone. So this drone is navigating in an inside environment. Here, again, red and blue pixels are on and off spikes. The ground truth is on the right. So the ground truth here is obtained through the LiDAR that was embedded on the drone. And here are the dense prediction from StereoSpike. And you can see that qualitatively they're rather accurate. And so here are some additional qualitative examples with the ground truth on the second column, the events superimposed on the luminance value on the left, and two techniques, so DDES, which is a competitor for depth estimation, and StereoSpike on the right. And you can see that here as well, it works relatively well. And so for numbers, so here what I show you is the mean depth error in centimeters. So this is the average error of the estimation across all the pixels of the image. And so you can see that with StereoSpike, it goes down to, let's say, 17 centimeters, which is not that bad, given that the maximum depth in the room was, I think, 6 or 7 meters in this case. So here, one important point is that StereoSpike is not the state-of-the-art, and probably there are much better approaches now, but even when we published it, it was almost at the level of the state-of-the-art, but a little bit higher, so there was another approach that led to better results. But the point is that if you look at the neuromorphic compatibility, sparsity, and also number of parameters, StereoSpike was probably better. So the point here is not to argue that we have the best approach in terms of performance, but that we have a relatively good trade-off between energy consumption applicability on neuromorphic hardware and performance. And just a small detail, but which I think is of importance. So we tested stereospike under binocular and monocular viewing, so with only the data captured by one camera or two cameras. And of course, with two cameras, it's a little bit better because in this case, you can use the stereoscopic information. So just to go a little bit further on stereospike, one interesting thing is that it's possible to add to the loss a spike penalization, so which actually favor a network with a lower amount of spikes. And this is what you see here with the mean depth error on the y-axis and the mean tensor density on the x-axis, and you can see that even when we decrease by a lot the number of spikes through this constraint, we are still able to have a relatively good mean depth error. At some point, of course, it explodes a bit, so that has to be taken into control, but we can still have very good performances with 5 times less spike. So the take-home of this part is that we design a deep convolutional SNN for depth estimation in visual scenes captured by event-based cameras. From a supervised learning using the surrogate gradient, stereospikes leads to very good performance with a limited number of parameters and a neuromorphic compatible architecture. And I know that some of you are really interested here on the neuromorphic or hardware aspects. So we had a first try this year at this ISCAS conference. So this is in collaboration with Angela Wang at SUTD. And so she worked with her team on the implementation of stereospike on neuromorphic hardware. So for now, she worked just on simulation and one part of the network. So we are very far from having a full implementation, but this is the first step, and we are actually leading a project together so as to pursue this try over the next years. Quite quickly, using the same sort of architecture, but not on depth estimation, but on optic flow estimation, it's feasible to extract the optic flow pattern. So this is very important for navigation, simultaneous localization, and mapping. And this was the work of Javier Cuadrado, who defended his thesis 2 years ago. And here you can see some, I don't know if you see well, but some estimation of the optic flow in the scene. So here as well, we had a spiking neural network with a U-shape architecture. And so you have the ground truth values. So here, each color represents the direction of the flow across time. The unmasked estimation are on the right, and on the middle, you have the estimation of the optic flow. I think here the take-home message is relatively the same as for stereospike, in the sense that we are not exactly the state of the art in terms of performance. So here, this is the endpoint error in pixels per second, so how accurate is the optic flow. But we argue that in terms of trade-off between energy consumption and performance, we have a relatively nice network. Okay, so that's the end of the second part. How good am I with time? Perfect. Okay, so actually I realized that through the talk I'm going deeper into biology and neurobiological mechanisms. So this part on motion processing was done with one very nice colleague in the CerCo laboratory, who's actually professor in sports. And so he had a 9R on modeling visual ability in sport experts. And so the name of this 9R was Beating Roger Federer, and it was in collaboration with the Faculty of Sports Science and UMaine, an enterprise that is designing event-based cameras. And here, the nice thing of the cameras developed by UMaine is that you can embed on an FPGA card that is associated with the camera, the processing, and on this FPGA card, you can have the local learning of the properties, and you can also design different filters. So these cameras, if you want, they're able not only to detect luminance, increment and decrement, but you can also introduce some spatial filtering of the scene. So for example, it's feasible to introduce a contrast detection through a spatial filter or other different things. So here we wanted to use that to mimic the visual system. And so we used a version of the camera where spikes are representing not the luminance and increment and decrement, but the contrast increment and decrement. So these filters were detecting, like a bright spot in front of a black background, or actually the appearance of that, or the opposite. And this is actually what the retinal ganglion cells in the retina are doing. And so here we worked on learning without supervision. So we worked on very basic things, and we wanted to see whether these cameras and spiking neural network are able to detect local motion in the scene. And so we started with simulated data where we had bars moving along different direction and speed. And we also had one application in sports. And so this is Robin here on the left and the PhD student Guillaume who was in charge of the project. And here, in this case, they were passing a ball together. And so there was a motion unit, a motion detector on the ball. So we knew exactly the X and Y position of the ball over time. And this is what the camera captured. So these are the direction of the ball from the sensor. And next, so we train a convolutional neural network without any supervision. So I'll detail that on the next slide. And so the idea here is that these neural networks add different layers. Each of these layers add different latencies. So this point is quite important. So we introduce some delays in the inputs, because we know that in the visual system of primates, there are some delays that can permit to better extract the spatiotemporal properties of the scene. So this is what we did here. So the different channels for each layer were associated with different delays. We had 3 different delays. And well, actually, this work led to a patent that was validated in 2022 that is called STDP motion. And so, as I told you here, the learning is not done with supervision, but using a bio-inspired plasticity rule called the STDP, the spike timing dependent plasticity. So just to give you a test of how it works, so here we used leaky, integrate, and fire neurons. So this is like a classical model of the membrane potential for people doing computational neuroscience. So here you have the membrane potential of one neuron as a function of time. What you can see is that whenever a spike is received by this neuron, the membrane potential increases up to a given value. And because of the leak, this membrane potential goes back to the baseline. And sometimes, when different spikes are coming together to the neuron, the membrane potential accumulates up to a threshold value that is given here by the dotted red line. And in this case, because the threshold is passed, the neuron triggers an action potential and sends the spike to the rest of the network. The STDP rule is very simple. So whenever the neuron membrane potential reaches its threshold, all the synaptic weights that are associated with the spike that the neuron received in the recent past are increased. So in this case, it means that these 3 synaptic weights are increased. And so it's just a Nebbian rule that permits to detect the spikes that led to the response of a neuron. So it detects statistics in the inputs. So we implemented this rule on the network. And so these are some results. So here are the toy examples. So this is a bar moving in different directions. And here you can see the selectivity of 2 neurons after training in the network without any supervision. In color are encoded the delays. So you can see here that this neuron is selective to a motion that is going if I'm correct, to the upper left, because it starts here and it goes left, encoding in color, and this neuron is responding to something that is going up. So what it means is that after unsupervised learning, this artificial neural network has neurons that are selective to different motion directions. And here you have also the velocity, speed selectivity of these neurons, and you can see that these selectivities are changing from one neuron to the other. So in other terms, in terms of the population code, it's feasible to extract from the response of the network the local motion and local velocity in the inputs. And so if we apply that to the real data, so here again are the data that were collected by Robin and Guillaume. You can see that the ball is moving in these two directions, and so these are the selectivity of the neurons after training. I don't like this figure too much because Guillaume didn't align it with the real direction, but so here these two directions are actually these two directions. This is just a figure that is not well done. So believe me, so at the end, the network became very selective to the most frequent motion direction in the data. And so from that, you can play a bit with the network. And so something that we did was to see whether it's feasible from the spikes generated by the different layers of the network to predict the endpoint of the ball trajectory given only some part of this trajectory. So here you have the percentage of presentation of the trajectory, and here on the y-axis you have the mean absolute error. So of course, when the network is seeing all the trajectories, the error is relatively small. But what you can see is that even when half of the trajectory is masked, specifically in the last layer of the network, the prediction of the endpoint is not too bad. And what Guillaume did was to compare this data with psychophysical recordings that were performed on 12 human participants. And what you can see is that even though the performance of the network is a little bit better than human performance, the slope of the curve is relatively identical. So here we think that it's a way to characterize spatial perception in human participants, and that this sort of network can be used to better understand how we as primates perceive the world. So as a take-home message on this part, so we used event-based cameras and spiking neural network to model motion selectivity, and also to predict trajectories in different applications. And all the processing here can be realized on a dedicated neuromorphic chip. We didn't do it until the very end during the project. We will be very happy to do it, but I think that human is actually over now, so I'm not sure that it will be feasible in the next future, unfortunately. Okay, so that was the third part, and maybe what is the most exciting to me now are more the perspective and things that we are doing now in the team. I put many different things, so feel free to interrupt me or to ask if you're interested in one specific aspect. But so first thing that we are doing right now is to work. So this work that I just presented you use different delays in the network, but in this case the delays were fixed and we had only 3. But actually in biological system, these delays are learned through development, and because the myelin, so these are the like the structure of the myelin is something that is surrounding the axon, and the width and the thickness of the myelin has an influence on the propagation velocity. And we know that with development, so between childhood and adulthood, this myelin changes a lot. And so actually it suggests that this myelin and the thickness of the myelin can be learned. And so this is something that we can also do in spiking neural network. And so with Timothée, we have one nice PhD student, Alexandre Kéan, who started his PhD in September, who works on spiking neural networks, and more specifically on recurrent spiking neural network with learnable delays. And so during his internship, he developed one version of that he called DelRec. And the idea here is to have learnable delays in recurrent connection and also in feed-forward connection. I won't go into the details, but this is just like theoretical work showing that just changing slightly one delay in one connection can change a lot the behavior of the network. So here you have like the same networks with the same inputs. The only thing is that here this recurrent delay was changed from here to there, from 1 to 3. And so from here to here, the output of the network is doing coincidence detection in this case and pattern generation in this case. So what it means here is that just, like these recurrent delays, they might have a very important impact on the nature of the computations that are performed by the network. And so we use this type of network to perform different tasks. So one on the SEC dataset. So this is an audio dataset where sounds are people who were, like just reading out loud different numbers. So the auditory signal was processed by a model of the cochlea to generate spikes. And here the task of the network is to decode the number. So this is the SSC dataset, and the PSMNIST is a vision dataset. And actually, we reached the state of the art on these two datasets using these learnable delays. So this is one line of research. One other is done under the Space SNN project, which is in collaboration with Singapore. So here, as in my other works, we want to use event-based data and spiking neural network to extract meaningful information from the scene. But in this case, we want to do navigation. And so by navigation, I mean first visual place recognition, VPR. So we want a system to be able to recognize the different places he goes to, and notably to remember previous places he explored, even though these places can be captured from different angles at different moments of the day or at different moments of the year. And so it's quite challenging. And so at the very end, we want to use that and odometry to perform simultaneous localization and mapping. So this is done in collaboration with the ETIS lab in Cergy, and notably with Nicolas Cuperlier, who is assistant professor in biorobotics there. And so Geoffroy Caim is the PhD student in charge of this part. He's beginning his third year of PhD. He has very interesting results. He's just about to submit a paper. Just to illustrate a bit the difficulty of the task. So this is the Brisbane dataset. So these are data collected by an event camera on the roof of a car while driving around this environment. And so data were collected at different moments of the day. So you have the RGB frames and the events on the top right. And just as an illustration, you have the exact same position at different moments of the day. So at sunrise, in the morning, and during daytime. And you can see that just because the illumination of the scene is changing a lot, the RGB data are also changing a lot. Of course, the event data are also changing. And so here the idea is to exploit these event data to process them with spiking neural network in order to recognize places. So far, this is the recall, what is called the recall AN, so the ability to the network on the left and the precision recall curve. So here, the higher the best, and here the higher the best as well. And so this is the state of the art, and so we are a little bit above it. And right now, the system is relatively well able to recognize among almost 600 places over this trajectory, with only a few examples, because here the trick is that you could argue that it's a classification task, but the point is that we only have a few data points for each position. So in this data set, there are only 5, I think, traverses. So meaning that for one place, we have only 5 data points. So it's much more complicated than learning a category on an image data set like ImageNet. Okay, 2 other PhD students are working on something that I think is very promising. So they are trying to extract future prediction. And so this is a form of unsupervised learning or auto-supervised learning, self-supervised learning, depending on the literature. But so here the idea is to train the network to predict its future in the upcoming events. So for example, from the event stream, at some point you will stop the data stream and from the previous data, train the network to predict the future. And in this case, it's not supervised because, or it's not really supervised because this is the data that the network is collecting. And so there are some theoretical works now that are suggesting that learning a representation of the world this way might help to have a very good representation of the surrounding space. And that networks that are pre-trained using this approach can then be fine-tuned to other tasks and could work well. Last point, so I told you that event-based data sets are quite difficult to collect. Those that I showed you took a lot of time to the group that did it. And domain adaptation is not always feasible. And so one idea is to do some simulation. So start from RGB data or from some data collected in the environment to generate events. Several groups are working on that, and there are more and more. But so here, the idea is to use what is called laser grammetry. So this is something that you can even do with your cell phone or your iPhone, so you can capture, like the properties of the scene. So this is a collaboration with Christophe Hurter from ENAC. Actually, this is the living room of Christophe. So with his iPhone, he captured, like the position of every furniture, the bed, and so on in the living room. And so from that, you can define a 3D mesh of the environment. And from this 3D mesh, you can design a software that is able to simulate different trajectories within this environment. So here you see the trajectory in red. So this is just a translation from one point of the room to the other. And these are the events that are associated with that. And so through this system, we can generate a lot of data, event-based data, and use that to pre-train or to train spiking neural networks with the hope that this simulation is close enough to real data and that the pre-training is useful. And so this is a PhD thesis of Maxime Vaillant, who's in between France and Singapore. So he did the first half of his PhD, and he will move to Singapore in a month to do the second part. And one of the applications in ENAC is to work with what they call the drone aviary. So this is a huge room where they have different drones moving together. And so we already model the 3D environment of this room. And so we have a pre-trained network with the spikes that are generated by your software. And he will keep on going in this direction. And this is it. I'm done. Before to conclude, I really want to thank all the wonderful students who are involved in this project. So they are on the 2 top rows, and all my colleagues, specifically those in Singapore. So in particular, Wei Tsang and Lai Xing. And thank you for your attention.